Hello everyone, Mr. Love here, coming to you from the Diesel Lab. Today we're going to be doing something important that you'll probably run into quite a bit as a diesel technician. This is going to be priming the fuel system after we either run out of fuel, change out filters, or change out injectors, something like that. With our diesel fuel systems, if we run out of fuel, if we lose fuel at any time through any of these lines or anything, that it's not going to run or even fire at all. The way that these diesel engines work is we have our injection pump right here on this style. So this one here uses a distributor type injection pump. So down here we have a pump that creates a couple thousand PSI of fuel pressure. That couple thousand PSI of fuel pressure, every time the pump rotates and it pushes the fuel through that one line, you can see it's distributor type because there's a different line for each cylinder. This is our Cummins 4BT, so we have 4 lines coming out of here, one to each injector for each cylinder. So what we got to do is we got to make sure that we have fuel up here. If we lose fuel in these lines right here, all we're going to do is have air in there. If we have air in there, the air is going to compress, where our fuel won't compress it. Our fuel is going to transfer the energy from here all the way up to here undiminished. So down here, if we create 2,000 PSI, we instantly have 2,000 PSI of fuel pressure up here. If we have any air in the line, what would happen, we'd create 2,000 pounds of pressure down here, and it would have to travel all the way through the line. It would have to compress all that air enough to then lift the injector off the seat. So necessarily do we use all the fuel that's in our line each time that it fires there. We're really just transferring the energy through. If we don't have the fuel pressure there to lift our injector off their seat, it's not going to spray out fuel at all. If we have any air in there, even a little bit, it's not going to work. We need our hydraulic principles for this to operate. So what we got to do is first start out, definitely make sure we got fuel in our tank. Working on trucks, I've seen this, hundreds and hundreds of times where the truck driver is going up a hill or not paying attention to his fuel gauge, totally runs out of fuel in there. So what you do, you go out to the site, usually the side of the road, or if it's a piece of equipment, tractor, something like that, out in the field. Go out there, make sure we top off our fuel tank before we even start doing anything else. So we'll top off our fuel tank. The next thing we want to do is we want to get fuel down to either our lift pump or our fuel filter, depending on our setup. This one here is a little hand primer lift pump on it. More modern ones are going to have an electric lift pump on there just to help draw the fuel out of the tank and take it up to our filters and pump and stuff like that. So this one here is a little hand one, so you kind of see how that works. And we have our fuel filters here. This one has a water fuel separator and a regular fuel filter on there. What we've got to make sure we do is get all the air out of our fuel filter too. So we'll take our little filter wrench right here. If you do have to use filter pliers or anything, make sure you go up on the top of the filter. If we use filter pliers down lower on our filter, it'll crush our filter, make it so it's not any good anymore. We couldn't rupture a hole or something in it. We want to reuse this fuel filter. If you have a new one to put on, obviously you could throw a new one on if you wanted to, but most of the time when you do this, you're just going to get it running again, just bleeding the fuel out, so we'll reuse the fuel filter. So we'll use our little filter wrench, we'll get that on there. Always go to the highest point we can. It's stronger at the top than it is at the bottom. So we'll go up here to the top, and we'll just break it loose. So if we don't have a good lift pump or anything on here, you can take the filter all the way off and fill it up with fuel. If we do fill it up with fuel, we want to try to dump the fuel down in these outside holes right here. The way the filter works, the unclean fuel or oil or anything goes in these outside holes, then the nice clean fuel or oil is drawn up through the middle right there. So if we have any contaminants in our jug of fuel or anything, we don't want to dump them down the center there because it's going to go straight into the engine. So you can see this filter is empty right now, so we got to get this primed up. This obviously isn't the one that's on the engine there, but if it was, we would fill it all the way up to the top using the outside holes, make sure that it would be totally full with no air in there. Sometimes what you have to do, especially on a truck or a piece of equipment where the fuel tank's lower than the engine itself, for this one, our fuel tank's up high, it's above everything, so it's a lot easier to bleed. If this was out on a truck or something with a low fuel tank on it, we'd have to, probably blow air in here. So what I've done a lot of times is just take our compressed air from our air compressor, or you can even put your mouth on there and blow on it if you want. But you put it down in the tank with a rag with our blowgun, we blow in there, and we would just wait for the fuel to start running out of our filter right here. So this one we didn't totally run out of fuel. I just bled it out a little bit for this demonstration here. So we still have a little fuel up there. So what we could do, we could prime it up by hand. You can see as soon as I start priming it here, the fuel starts running out of our filter. That's what we want to see. We want to prime it up enough where we don't get any air out of there. We just get pure fuel out of there. So I got fuel up to this point now. My filter's all the way full here. So I'm going to snug my fuel filter back down. You don't have to go super tight with these. They get tighter as they go. So if you go super tight to begin with, the next guy's probably not going to get it off, and you're going to destroy the filter taking it off. So not very much fun. Okay, so wipe our extra fuel off there. We are going to be dealing with fuel today, so we're going to make a little mess here. Okay, so now we got fuel up to our water separator here. Our other fuel filters right there behind there. This one's a little canister style that usually breaks when you take them apart. So this one we're going to leave on there, and we're just going to prime it up from just using our water fuel separator. So it has multiple fuel filters on there. It's best to fill up each fuel filter, or at least crack them loose and get them primed up to there. That way you get all the air out of the system, as soon as you can. Okay, so we got our fuel filter tightened back up. We'll prime it a few more times. We'll get the fuel circulating back through everything. You can see here, this is my return line from my injectors. I'm starting to get fuel through there. So my system's pretty well primed up. So at this point here, my engine's still not going to fire though. I could crank it over. I can show you right now. Crank over my engine. You can see I'm getting a little smoke out of there, but it's not firing for me. So what we need to do next is bleed our injector lines. So bleeding our injector lines could be a very long process here, depending on how bad we ran it out of fuel. So if we're just changing out our fuel filter, or it ran out of fuel and the driver noticed right away before it totally sucked all the fuel out of the whole system, we won't have to bleed it as much. But if it's totally dry, we're going to have to bleed all our lines and stuff. So sometimes what we have to do, we have to crack our lines down here right at the pump. That way we start getting the air and stuff out of the pump. But most of the time what we do, we're just going to go up to our actual injectors and crack the lines up there. So that's what we're going to do today. Okay, so I'm over at my injector lines here. So the best thing to do would be to use a line wrench on here. So line wrench, about 3 sides of it. It's made to go around the line and actually go on there. Problem with the line wrench for most injectors that you run into, there's not enough room to actually get those on. So if you can't use a line wrench, open-end wrench usually works pretty good. Just be careful not to round it off. So these ones have been off multiple times, so they shouldn't be super tight. So I'm just going to loosen it up right now. So you can go down through and loosen them all up right now, or you could just do one at a time. I'll just loosen them all up here real quick just for the video purpose. There's not really a right way or a wrong way. Both of them work just as good. If you open them all up, it could be a little messier sometimes just because, you got multiple fuel lines spraying at the same time. And not necessarily, all the air is coming out at the same time. So you'll have to go back through and do this, multiple times. Okay, so I got all my injector lines loose here. I'm going to take this wrench off so it doesn't go flying. Okay, so now I'm going to crank over my engine again here. Okay, so you can see I'm starting to get a little bit of wetness here on a couple of these here. So sometimes we could just loosen them up a little bit. Sometimes we actually have to lift up on the line to pull it away. You hardly ever have to take the line all the way off. So just be aware of that. Usually you can just loosen it and wiggle it enough so it comes off its seat there. If you do take it off all the way, just be very careful because they're very hard to start again. We don't want to cross-thread these. Okay, so I got my fuel lines loosened up there. So sometimes while you're cranking this over, what's going to happen is I'm starting to get it to fire on a few cylinders. as you're going through there. So it could get a little smoky. It's going to run a little rough, but it's what you got to deal with here. Okay, so we'll turn it over again here. We'll get a little more fuel coming out of it. So you can see our fuel spraying out really good on a couple of these here. So the ones that start to spray out right off the bat, we'll tighten those right back up for now. Again, we just use our open end wrench there. This one happens to be a 17 millimeter. They're all different sizes though. Some are standard, some are metric. So just use the right wrench for the job because you don't want to round these off. So we didn't have fuel at, we had fuel at this one. We didn't have fuel at this one yet, or this one down here. So I'll loosen this one back up as I tightened it already. Okay, so now I'm going to crank it over again. It might start to fire on the ones that we just tightened up again. We'll see. Okay, so I'm starting to get good fuel out of this one now. So I'm going to tighten this one back down. So sometimes you just have to go a little loose with them. Sometimes you got to go quite a bit, just depending on how much tension's on the line. Okay, so our last one to bleed off is our number 3 injector right here, and when we're not getting fuel yet. Okay, you can see it's starting to fire right now. We got a little fuel coming out of this one still. We'll snug that down. So we'll go just a little bit more. I started to see a little fuel out of number 3 there, but not that much. Okay, so we got a little more fuel out of there. I'm going to tighten this down, and what we're going to do, we're going to let this fire right up now. Okay, so we got this tightened down. It should fire right up and start running good now. What we're going to do while it's running, we're going to bleed our injectors while it's running. So, make sure you're in a nice safe spot. You don't have your hand in the fan or anything like that, where you can loosen up the lines without, getting hurt or anything. Okay, so now when we go to fire this up, it should, take off, start firing on each cylinder. It might run a little rough. It might get a lot of smoke. We're going to go through and bleed the injectors one at a time here. Okay, so that was a success. You saw that when we cracked them open. I don't know if you heard it good on the camera, but the pitch of the engine actually changed because we were actually, not firing on that cylinder anymore. So, go through, bleed them all out each time. You can do them one at a time. It's usually best to do multiple ones at first just to see which ones have fuel off the bat, but then go through one at a time. Especially after it fires up again, crack each one just for a second just to get the rest of the air out of there. That's all there is to it. Make sure all the lines are tightened back down. If you had to take off any clamps or anything, make sure you put them back on there. If there's any covers or anything, make sure you get everything back on there. But that's basically all there is to it. Just the name of the game is getting all the air out of the system. Okay, so that's all there is to bleeding the fuel system here. Pretty, straightforward. Just got to get all the air out of the system. One thing I didn't mention in the beginning that I normally talk about, definitely make sure you have on your safety glasses. You're playing with pressurized fuel here. Your face is going to be right in front of it there. So have on your safety glasses. If you're working on really high pressure fuel systems, this one's only a couple thousand PSI. Some of them, on a common rail or something like that might be up to 20,000 PSI. So with those ones, if you have to bleed any lines or anything, wear a face shield. Usually with our, HUE systems or our common rail fuel systems, usually we don't have to bleed the lines like this. Usually this is just for the older style injection systems where the fuel pressure has to lift the injector off the seat. What we do have to do with our common rails and HUE systems and stuff like that is still get fuel up to our pump. So our first stages will still be the same, where we're going to make sure our fuel tank's full, crack our filters loose, and prime up our system either by blowing in the tank, filling up our fuel filters, running our lift pumps or our hand pumps, whatever we have for our lift pumps, and we want to get fuel up to the pump. Once the fuel gets up to the pump, usually those ones will prime themselves up, and get running right away after that. As soon as we get fuel up to the pump, maybe a few cranks after that. With our distributor typing systems, either our distributor injectors or our inline injectors, those ones we definitely have to bleed all the fuel out, because the whole thing is done with the hydraulic principles of fluid transferring the energy from one point to another undiminished. So that's all there is for today. So have a great day and give her diesel.